Dr. Swamy, between 1962 and 69 you were at Harvard University. Can you tell me something about how you got involved in the Indian nuclear policy at the time, what your interests were?
Well, at that time, the main event which made us all very interested was the Chinese nuclear test. And we had already a war with China in '62, in which we were quite badly humiliated. So it made us all think about the nuclear weapons at that time, and the overseas Indians were particularly interested in the problem.
What did you do?
Well, first of all, we called a meeting of overseas Indians in Cambridge, Massachusetts, scientists from MIT and Harvard and other places. And we discussed the issue, and we felt that India ought to have nuclear weapons to safeguard its position in the world, which was declining after the Chinese attack.
I'm just going to go over that and ask you to make it the first person if possible, because you were the person who organised it, right? All right. What was your role in those days, the 62, 69?
My main contribution was to demolish the myths that India couldn't economically afford nuclear weapons. Of course, I made these political arguments too, but the main contribution I made was a study of the costs of acquiring a credible deterrent, and show that it was within the budget of India and it would not be an unbearable burden.
Can you explain to me what the petition was all about?
Yes, I also organized with another professor who was visiting at that time at MIT called Raj Krishna to obtain signatures of a large numbers of very prominent Indians residents in the United States and write to the Prime Minister to say that India should go in for nuclear weapons. That was one petition. And the second petition we sent was in '67 to urge the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, not to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. These were the two petitions.
Why did you feel so strongly that India should perhaps go ahead on that kind of program?
But there were two reasons. One was clearly that China, we had to protect ourselves in China. We didn't want to be caught napping, so to speak, like '62. The second thing we noticed, which was disturbing us a lot, is the amount of international prestige that China was getting from a country which was considered as a bankrupt country in '61, '62, to a country which was being equated to a superpower only because they had acquired nuclear weapons. So I think both these arguments were finding favor with us.
What was your personal reaction at the news that the Chinese had exploded a bomb?
My reaction at that time, when I didn't know the Chinese as well as I know them now, was that they would use it against India.
Let's just go over that again, but without the reference to the present day. How did you feel at the time that you heard the news of the test?
I was alarmed. I felt suddenly India was in a helpless state.
Let's just go over that.
And I felt that India ought to stand on its own feet to protect itself, because on this question I was quite sure that India would not get any international protection.
I'll just ask you again because there's some funny traffic noise there. What was your personal reaction to the news of the Chinese test?
I was alarmed. I felt India suddenly totally helpless on the international stage, and considering the way China was being promoted as a superpower all over the world in the international media, I thought India would be all alone and would have to fend for itself.
Just a bit back, you said that you thought they'd use the Chinese bomb on India. If we could just go over that one more time, that would be...
Yes, at that stage I was also convinced that the Chinese would use...
Interrupt you again.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to the Chinese test?
I thought India would be the victim. They would use it on India, and they wouldn't hesitate, and that we were going to be all alone in the world, and China was being lionized by the media, and I thought that we'll have to fend for ourselves.
Can you explain this antagonism between India and China at this time?
At that time, I certainly think the antagonism came out of a mistaken notion amongst the Indian people that the Chinese aggressed on us. And they thought the Indian people...
Let's do that again. Can you explain the antagonism between India and China at this time?
Well, at that time, the antagonism was clearly one of arising out of the fact that China had come into possession of what we considered to be Indian territory, and what we thought was unprovoked 1962 war that China launched against us. The antagonism came out of a sense of betrayal that Indians felt regarding China.
Now, how economically viable at this time was an Indian bomb program?
At the moment, it's a very small part.
In this period, 62-64?
In this period, I estimated that the cost of the bomb would and its delivery system would not cost more than about 750 crore rupees, which is roughly about about $1 billion, and $1 billion would have meant about 15% of our budget, which I thought we could afford.
Let's just go over that because there was some traffic noise. If you could just explain that to me again.
The cost of a credible nuclear deterrent, I calculated at that stage, was about $1 billion. And $1 billion would have meant about 15% of our budget. And I thought that's very easy to set aside for the program, and I didn't think that it was a burden.
Excellent. Let's go to a close-up, please. Now, how did the Indian government at this time, the government of L.B. Shastri, respond to your petition?
Well, nothing was told to us in writing, but visiting ministers of the Shastri government told us that the Prime Minister was very sympathetic, and because of international factors this was not being made public, but they appreciated what we did. They were therefore quite appreciative.
How was this idea of having an Indian bomb compatible with traditional views?
Well, I think there is a misunderstanding about Indians' traditional views. India did send army into Goa. India did send an army into and fought a war in Kashmir in 1948. India did get Hyderabad by force. I think the Nehru projection on the international arena distorted India's image. India was not a pacifist country at all. India placed great emphasis on the higher value on non-violence, but it was never a substitute for not doing anything or for cowardice. We in our ethos do give a place to the use of force. So it wasn't inconsistent at all. It was basically Nehru's projection on the world, which the world misunderstood to be India's spiritual values. It was not so at all.
Let's just do that again, but a bit briefer. If you can use the words an Indian nuclear weapons program or an Indian bomb was not incompatible, that would be even better.
Okay. Well, I first of all think that the Indian nuclear deterrent is not inconsistent with the...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let's put it in the period of the time.
Yeah.
At the time, how was it that your view, your attitude towards the nuclear issue, how was it compatible with this sort of traditional Indian view?
The traditional Indian view was to protect our independence. It was therefore quite consistent with the requirements of the time and the feeling of the people. The world may have been misled is by Jawaharlal Nehru's own international projection, which in fact had no reality on the ground.
You can just say that Nehru's traditional perspective wouldn't have impinged upon a bomb program. As far as Nehru's own professions are concerned, it didn't get translated in terms of the reality at home. We did use the army in Goa and in Kashmir,
So I don't find any inconsistency here.